Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Douville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who I think you can safely say is your buddy and mine.
Tim Longo. Sorry, got me on that one. I'm nobody's buddy.
Yeah. You're going to slip me a morphine if I need it?
Yeah, maybe.
A Surette. Maybe I need a Surette. That's what I need to get through the week. So if I'm ever flagging in a meeting, just hand me a Surette. If we were in the same house. Anyway, we're talking about Far Cry 2. We've got a few topics still to pick up, and we're going to do basically our takeaways next week with a bonus episode where we talk about further iterations on the series. I've been playing some Far Cry 3. Tim's going to play some Far Cry 6. I previously played Far Cry 4 and Primal and some of Blood Dragon, as I recall. So we will kind of talk about what they kept and what they didn't keep, which I think will be illuminating for Tim. You will need to play a few hours to kind of like start to see all the systems. They are pretty well given to you pretty early, and like it's not like they slowly unlock a lot of stuff. So you should get a true look, and we were talking pre-show. You play some Ghost Recon, so you know what the formula is.
Yeah, and there's Ghost Recon. I don't know. Is there loot in 3? There's probably not. Like sort of like traditional, like a level of a gun has a certain loot level to it and stuff like that, like a Diablo.
Oh, there isn't generated gun loot like that.
Yeah,
so they
go there in Ghost Recon, which was a bit controversial.
No, they still in 3. They still have the gun vendor that you're basically unlocking, and they have a quest. It's a really thin quest to basically unlock those guns for free, or you can buy them. So you can sort of make your own choice. So it's kind of
Yeah. Okay. Different than
the whole thing. But we'll talk
there.
We'll
get there. Yeah.
Sure.
So,
there's a lot to cover. We can talk about all the systems in this game, that and how they take them forward and how they make them different in the future. Because I think they we were talking a lot last week about friction, and so much friction is sanded away so quickly in this series that I actually lament it a little bit. So that's worth talking about, because I still think of the Far Cries that I've played, this is still the best one. And I think because some of the friction is actually really useful. I do think it's probably too much friction, as we were talking last week about how you just don't feel like you can ever get the thing done that you want to do, which I totally get. I was playing it in a different headspace and time space. Like I said, it was like a 4-day weekend, and that's all I did for 4 days or whatever, almost 5 days. So I think I even took Wednesday off. So I was just, blazing through it and just, okay, whatever. Like, I don't care if it takes me an hour or 2 hours or 4 hours to get over to that dot on the map. And so much of that is sanded away in later games. So it'll be super interesting.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the notes that I put down for this session was just a reinforcement of the friction thing for a second, of just like, it's a pretty like tried and true traditional, I guess, approach of a structure of this type that, you put the objective marker on the thing on a location that's quite far from where you got the mission. And so, and in a game like this where you're not going to run there, so you're probably driving or taking a boat, you're going to run into trouble, like we talked about last episode. And I get sidetracked easily, and that's probably why I haven't progressed the main mission as much as I could. And I do, it's a shooter. I like shooters. So it's like, I enjoy stopping at a camp on the way. That's probably faster and easier for me to just take down a checkpoint than just try to drive through sometimes, because I'll blow up, I'll have to reload or whatever it is, or it just becomes a whole thing. So if I might as well just, if I'm driving through and there's a lot of enemies there, it's just probably more efficient to stop. So I enjoy that process, but the where the friction hits too much, and I don't want to rehash last week, but when you have multiple of those on a path to get to the other side of the map, essentially, you're draining resources, and I feel like you're not. I don't get anything from other than the fun, I guess, which is definitely good, right? Of course, intrinsic. Right. I get the intrinsic aspect of it, but I don't like. I'm usually worse off, even though I didn't die. So at least I don't have to reload, I guess. But
I mean, the real fun is the guys we killed along the way. So.
Exactly. That's I guess that's the easy way of saying what I'm saying. Of like, I should stop. It's the best way to avoid the most amount of friction. But by the time I'm done taking this camp down, I'm probably worse off, as far as resources go, or gun wearing out goes, or whatever. So probably my vehicle's in worse shape too. So I don't know. Right. So I actually find myself trying to go around things more often now.
Sure. Yeah. I think that there's, like if you can get one of the little runabouts or whatever they're called, the little dune buggy things, those things are great because you can ride them off road all over the place. As long as you don't drive them up into a rock or something like that, they kind of can go everywhere, anywhere that's flat, right? Obviously they can't go in the big, the barriers that you can't go across. I mean, so they're just as restricted as you are, but they're great for like, I want to go around this camp. I'll just drive through the forest here, and it's pretty pulse pounding or a jungle, because the trees are everywhere and you still don't want to bang into one of them. But you can, just go off road in some of those vehicles. And so I do find myself doing that. And of course you can always, repair the vehicles. See, I'm gonna back into that topic and then talk about the ways and everything else breaks down. We'll kind of go through that because that's going to be a huge theme this time in this episode of just like, I once had a friend describe in a blog post, his feeling of System Shock 2, which was like, I run out of ammo, my guns break. Also, I have psychic powers. Like, those, like that was his brief. Because that game is so heavily tilted towards, your guns don't work very long. Like you have to constantly repair them, as I recall in that game. It feels that way anyway. And that's happening here with everything. Like that is one thing. You go off road with a vehicle. That's why I like the buggy is it's the narrowest. It's actually the easiest to steer through the stuff, although it also feels really fast because you're low to the ground. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think I haven't cracked the vehicle stuff, progression up very much because I'm spending my stuff on others, but can you get to the point where one of those dune buggies is spawning at safe houses? Or you have to know where they are or find them to use them?
Well, so the way it works is I believe all the vehicles are basically spawned kind of based on where they are located, so that there are certain safe houses. Once your safe houses spawn vehicles, which is a buddy level you get to where it's like, oh, you'll always have a vehicle at your safe house. Once you get to that level, some of them will have buggies. But it's kind of based on like it's the ones that are kind of deeper into the jungle. You don't get to choose. There are no because this is not a game with menus, right? There's menus obviously for buying stuff, and things like that at the
computer.
Depot. But there aren't menus anywhere else, and right, yeah. Or even if you talk to the guy, I think it's the same thing. Actually, I'm not. No, you actually only talk to the guy for missions. So never mind. It's missions, only the computer that you buy the stuff from. So, yeah. That's like the only menu, that's not a like settings and whatever menu. The only menu in the game is using that computer. And the computer's diegetic. There's an actual computer in the world that you go sit down at. And it zooms all the way in. You don't see the frame of the computer and stuff like that. But, so it is really just a UI. But that could have been like you can imagine that it is like it's also rendered like an Apple II monitor that sort of slowly scrolls or something like it's a very early version of a computer interface. none of that stuff actually happens on screens really, but anyway, it does look computery. It looks how computers look on TVs of the era, actually,
Right.
more than anything else, with the scan lines being seen. So it's a whole, but that's it. Like, so you don't have options anywhere else to like pick things. Like if you want to go get your weapons out of the armory, they're all hanging on the wall. You have to know what they look like.
Yeah.
It's just everything is in the world. And
which I do like. I mean, I think that's a great, I think it's a great pillar, if you will, or just sort of consistency and commitment to the concept. I mean, the map it's just hilarious to me when I have the map open, I'm driving one-handed while being chased by two cars with my map open, trying to find where I'm going. It's just like they tell you not to do that in driving school.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so funny.
You're living on the edge, though, Tim. You're out here,
You're a merc. Yeah.
You have to. You've learned these things. You went and you got a Groupon for the crazy driving school, and you get to have fun with that. It's a whole thing. So yeah, it's.
But on the repairs, like I don't.
Yeah, back to the repairs.
Speaking of another, obviously we don't know if they had pillars or what their pillars would have been. But I don't know if this is the correct word, but is entropy, is that appropriate for things that degrade? Now, what is
sure?
Yeah, is that? Yeah, I'm trying to.
Sure, why not? Yeah,
so
it's reasonable.
That it's like everything degrades. It's like it's your guns, your vehicles, your health. I mean, your kind of. We'll have to talk about malaria as a sort of appendage to this topic, but which is a weird statement now that I'm saying it.
Yeah, it is a little weird. It feels like it's something systemically breaking down. Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, it feels because you're not sure when it's happening, and and it's like there's a resource associated with it, and there's missions associated with it, etc. It's sort of like your body is a physical representation of entropy at that point, or something. I'm way overthinking it, but the fact that I kind of like nothing is reliable, ironically, other than the gold gun that I found that is now
and your buddy.
But you said your buddies can die. Well, yeah, they're reliable in that they can.
They're reliable to you. Yes.
Yeah, they'll while they're alive, they'll come and help you. And those have been great moments for sure. When something bad happens and they show up, it's definitely like a cool. I'm glad I have them moment. But they will die. So it's like everything dies, so I don't know if there's a theme in here, if it was intentional or not. Obviously it must've been intentional, but that it's such a like, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of, I guess the friction is important.
Well, I would say it reflects a strength of vision, whether or not they called it pillars or whatever. I think there is a unifying vision. Like we talk about so many of these different things, and I think that there is a unifying creative vision behind it. Of this is the world in which we're living. In this game, we're in a game. We're in a place where systems have broken down, and everything else is breaking down too, and all of that is it's constantly reflected throughout. And in some cases, I think it feels like it's happening on a systemic level, and it sort of is, but not in the way you'd think. And there's somewhere it literally is just, I ran into a tree with my car, and now I got to get out and my trusty wrench, which I must be carrying in my back pocket at all times. I have to use that to just like tighten up this nut, and everything will be fine. Which is also a weird bit of resilience. I mean, the weapons too, like they never misfire, like, and blow the gun apart. It's just never happened to me. They break down in much of the way they do in System Shock 2, but without like a number associated with it. Like in that game, it was like a condition of your gun is 1 to 10, and here it just happens. And it happens at the most inopportune time when you're just charging in to do a thing. It's like, oh no, like now I'm rapidly backing up, because I want to keep these guys in front of me, so I know where they are, and maybe throw a grenade their way while I'm fiercely hitting the reload button to try to unjam it. Those things I think are different forms of interactions in the game. I think that the car stuff is literally just player skill and the physics of the world. Like that's just entirely driven by that. I mean, their cars are made out of glass a little bit in the sense like they will quickly break. Like you run into something and the vehicle doesn't change so much as like it just goes to damaged state where it's like, oh, it's smoking or whatever, you know, depending on whether you glance off of something or directly hit it hand on. It might be on fire immediately, right?
The driving model changes though too, right? When you're smoking. It feels
the car
like,
does get slower.
Yeah.
They rattle more. There are audio changes as well. There's I actually think the audio on the cars generally fantastic. As an aside, like that one, like it's like a Datsun or something. It's not actually a Datsun, but it looks like a Datsun from the 80s.
Yeah.
Like it has this pinging sound that it makes as you're driving around, which is just that is so like we had one of those. Like those cars made that noise, you know, like not as often as they do here, but they make that noise. You know, it's like I drive a Mini Cooper and, you know, the new Mini Cooper I have, I don't know how they achieve it because it's definitely different than my old one. They make this sound when they like, when you downshift, there's like a putt that they make that's very distinctive that they specifically recreated, and I feel the same way driving the cars in this game where it's like that audio bit is so exact. It's very specific to cars. I don't know what causes it. Is like pinging, like I've heard of pinging engines, like I've never had an engine pinged like that, but that's what this car sounds like. You know, in the game. I think that's great.
The audio design's good overall. The audio design and directions, it's very the cars, I think we talked about the VO in the past. I think that's and the way that it interacts with the AI. I mean, the VO is one of your main, because they don't have a lot of, in a good way, to your point on sort of consistency of vision, they don't have a lot of HUD stuff going on, right? And there's no radar. So and they're fairly camouflaged a lot of the time. So it's like, other than watching where they fire from and then listening to them, you know, so that's a good thing in my opinion.
There's nothing really non-diegetic, you know, it's all, you know, I guess that computer maybe like, because it's the most HUD-like thing, but it still sounds like a computer would sound from that era. So, you know, or that era of computer, I should say. You know, it sounds, so it just all is really good and grounded, you know, like you were saying about lacking a like crosshair or something like that. You have the, you know, you're just looking down the sight of the gun, like, and if you can see the person in it, then you shoot. Right. You don't have anything else informing you. You know, and so just all of that pure, like, no, we're going to represent everything in the world, like your quest givers in the world, you know, there's some that are pretty light, like you go to a tower and you get a mission from, you know, a voice box basically. Sure. Okay. A little thin, but still in the world. Like that could have just been another phone call, but like, no, you have to go to these cell towers or whatever they are, and, you know, satellite towers of some kind, and get them there. You know, you have to go to a gun dealer outpost, talk to that guy, you know, to get a thing. And it's just everywhere. It's everywhere. There's something in the world that you have to, you know, where you have to speak to a person or interact with an object to get the thing. Anyway, but more about breaking down.
Well, and then the guns specifically, their texture changes, right, as they're breaking down more as well. So there is some diegetic tell there, I believe, as well. At least that's what's happening to my gold gun, because it was very shiny and now it's not, and it's starting to jam more often. I don't think it's lost its accuracy, but I mean, I've used it for, you know, quite a while, like over 10 hours probably, and now it's finally and I've used it almost exclusively. So I think the bad thing about finding it that early is that I haven't really engaged with the gun system, you know, the progression of the guns very much, because I haven't felt like I needed to spend my money on that. So I've been buying gear items and like crates and stuff. But I don't know if the others do that, because I haven't really delved into it as deeply because I've had this gun. But have you noticed?
Yeah. I haven't noticed it. I mean, playing on the PS3, that is the sort of thing I could see also just not getting on there, because there's just texture cost and things like that, like another texture, etc. And it's also possible I just didn't notice because I think I mentioned at one point, I think it's upscaled as well, so the textures are they're not super crisp. Let's just say. So, and it's also not the sort of thing I would necessarily notice, to also be completely frank. Like I could just see myself missing it if that is a thing that is happening. But they are of course degrading. They are jamming, and it's interesting to me that the gold gun is eventually jamming as well, because that did take a long, long time for you. And I didn't know that happened at all. Like I didn't.
Yeah. I mean, I was optimistic for a long time that it wasn't going to, and then just recently it started to. So I'm experiencing the same, loop, just on a longer timeline. I just like the jamming, and I think the breaking down of things. It's the usual condition problem that anything with what you call it, any inventory items, RPGs do this a lot, right? Where Fallout did it as well, right? Where it's what's the condition of your thing? Do you have to repair it? You throw it away? Obviously, Breath of the Wild was a fairly recent, infamous, divisive one, where it's like Zelda games never had objects breaking down like that before. And how do you deal with that, and switching weapons out and all that stuff. So you kind of know.
And how do you do the Master Sword in that? This perfect sword, right? How do you do that?
Exactly.
That game.
Yeah. Well, what the answer there is you make a DLC about it, and make it really hard to. Yeah. Anyway, but it is still that sort of weird age-old problem where I'm really like torn, because from a design perspective, I fully understand it and can embrace it. But then on the player side, it's like, it's just one of those systems that's out of your hands. And with malaria specifically, which I think we'll get into in a second, or I guess I won't jump to malaria yet, but the jamming, how do I say this? The systems that I appreciate more when it comes to these sorts of negative reinforcement moments, like a gun jamming. The ones that I appreciate more are the ones that are more in my control and that I did something to jam it. You know what I mean? Versus it just being part of my impression is part of the random number generation gods doing it, and then there's some setting, or there's some equation that is saying that it'll degrade by this rate the more you use it, and so it's not totally random, but there is a when it's going to happen is random.
I think there's a guiding functionality behind it that is that they want it to happen at heightened moments to further heighten the moment.
You think they're tuning it that way?
I think I don't even think it's systemic. I think they're literally just looking for, like, okay, how long has it been? And okay, are you in a firefight with how many guys? How many have you killed? Oh, you're moving towards one? Okay, good. Now jam again.
Well, it's easy to test. We could. Yeah, I mean, I'll test it. You just shoot at a tree for a while and see what happens.
Exactly. Yeah, I think you could just just keep going and get more ammo. Shoot at a tree. Shoot, a whole 120, bullets for whatever for an AK or something, and just keep doing it. And just do it and do it and do it.
And it probably will never jam, is what you're.
I don't think it'll jam.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah. I think they literally doing it based on.
I get it.
Enemies up and down. Yeah.
That's sort of even worse.
It's like the last bullet in the gun that does more damage, right? It's to try to lead to that feeling, which is a thing that I don't think we do as much anymore.
No,
but this was the era where we did it, right? So
no, you totally can see how they got there. Well, I mean, like it was talked about with Far Cry 2 specifically, and we know that people on the team have been advocates for dynamic storytelling ever since.
Right.
But it's in that same realm of. You still need to tell us, you still need those dramatic moments and to tell a quote unquote macro story. And so you got to like fool with the knobs and puppet master a little bit, because in an open structure, you don't have that linear, assurance that the beats are going to be here, here, and here. It's like, well, we don't know where the beats are going to be. So we're going to have to manipulate it somehow to make it interesting. So let's tighten the screws here and tighten here and loosen them here, So I can see how how they get there, but if it feels too manipulative or unfair, then it can. I think from my perspective as a player, it can work against you too. But I appreciate and applaud the approach.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's actually akin to the sort of story / AI director in a Left 4 Dead game.
Yeah.
Except they're managing the challenge level externally to you. And I think that's probably more successful to you as a player, right? They're doing the same thing, right? But they're not doing it to you, right? They're not doing it to the thing, right?
Yeah.
That's a big distinction.
That's a great example, actually, because that's actually, I was trying to think of, the only thing I could come up with was the reload mechanic in Gears of War, but the AI director in Left 4 Dead is a better example of what I was talking about as far as like player initiated nonsense versus game initiated, So and to your point, in Left 4 Dead, they've tuned that game in such a way where you're going to mess up. As a player, you're going to mess up just because it's like, you bump into that car.
The enemy in any zombie situation is the people, not the
they're just going to be there, right? It's like either they see you, or you bump into alarm, or you alert a as they call witches, and then the music kicks in, more zombies rush in. It's like, but that was your fault. Right. And so that is
a perfect example. The first time we ever played Left 4 Dead together, it was you and me and Reed, and I think it was Tim Ramsey, who was a graphics programmer on Republic Commando. It was my first time playing that game. And we went into an area and they're like, okay, go. We got to go really slow now and be careful. Get everybody get ready. It's like, okay, let me just take out this one zombie, which was the witch. and everybody's like, no, who did? Who got the witch going? And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. Is that what you meant? And everything went wrong. And in that case, I was the human who was the enemy, who was the one who messed up. We did survive pretty well. We didn't make
it. But that makes for a good story, though, right? That's the
and this one they're trying to manufacture that, because it didn't. I mean,
if your theory's correct, we don't know that for sure yet. But
we don't know that for sure.
But I've played a lot
feel
of this
pretty
game.
Strong about it. Yeah. I've played a lot of this game and subsequent ones. So
it does seem to be the case with malaria, though, as you mentioned too. It's like I've never had malaria happen to me while I'm just like walking around.
Or even just driving from place to place. Often, it's like you don't go into the safe zone. Like you could just sit in the safe zone and just leave it on for 2 hours, and you would not have a malaria incident. I believe. Yeah. I think that is very specifically in moments of heightened tension, like you mentioned in pre-show. Like I was driving away from people, I was being chased, and suddenly I had malaria. I'm like, yeah, me too. Huh? How about that? Because I do think that they're doing the same thing there because they want the malaria to seem really important. To motivate the fact that when you run out of pills, like, no, you really need to deal with this, man. Like you can't wait. And I feel that pressure, even though I know it's manufactured. I mean, it's like being manipulated by music in a movie. It's like, I get what you're doing. Yeah. Okay. Soaring strings. Okay. I feel elated, but it's the same thing here. It's like, okay, you see what you're doing. Like,
don't think about it too hard, kind of thing.
Exactly. And as long as I just go, yeah, okay, well, when I get an opportunity to go there, that's the next place I'm going to go. Which is why I think I mentioned before that it's sort of a quest propulsion engine for them. Just force the player, not force, but guide the player, to the thing that you want them to do next to kind of progress the story. Is I think what's going on.
You're up in the ante and rationing things up, whatever phrase. Yeah. So what happens if you run out of pills and you don't go get pills? Does the game end?
That no. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure what happens. I mean, I think
maybe you pass out and then you wake up at the church or something. I don't know.
I could see that happening like that, but I honestly don't remember. There are times where they do things like that. There's actually, it's funny. I think I'm still technically in Act 1 in my save. even though the big thing that I thought was the transition from Act 1 to Act 2 has happened, which was the sort of the point in the game where I was like, it'd be cool if you got to this, because it's a big shift. It's where the second part of the map is, unveiled, and you're like,
I want to get to that point. Yeah.
It's
the second part. You mean the next kind of big zone, or
next big zone?
Yeah.
There's really just the two.
Yeah,
there's just the two in this game, and then sort of a little end part of the game that happens in an area, that I think I mentioned is sort of like, hey, if you're going this way, the game is ending, so like make sure you've done everything you want to do. I don't know if it's clear about that exactly, but my vague recollection is that it is. But yeah, there's a big story event that happens at that point, which involves both a player choice, a sort of binary choice. I will say, like, I don't know what year The Dark Knight came out. Sort of inspired. No, not that one. Is it that? Yeah, that one, Dark Knight. Yeah. I don't know when that came out, but there's a. Yes, that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, Dark Knight. And I was like, did this thing happen in the first movie or the second movie? Anyway, so there is that kind of moment, but the result of that either way, takes you back to the same place. So it's like you have this like momentary split where they had to create two set pieces, which you can basically choose between, but then they both result, in the next beat on the string, right? It's like a little split, and then it comes back together in the story. And there's not a lot of that happens in this game. You are sort of experiencing some of it with, whether or not you work for one side or both sides. Because I think you've been mostly working for one, and I've been just kind of like, whoever's closer.
Well, it's funny because that dried up. Like the one side dried up, but the other one didn't, and I didn't actually have any more options. So they actually forced me to. I don't think I had. Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any exclamation points, so I had to go do what I didn't want to do. I had to go.
Oh, so you didn't even have any like optional missions?
No, I had optional missions. Yeah, but I mean, if I wanted,
I think at that point you could continue with the optional missions.
Wait, what do you mean by optional missions? Like, what's an example?
Like the radio towers.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, I can't progress the story, right?
Right, but I think if you did those things, you would still ultimately progress the story. Like, I think it's like a do a number of missions thing. I think. Like, don't quote me on that for sure, because I would have to go read a wiki. But that's my suspicion, is that like I don't think you have to work both sides of the street. I don't think you have to.
Oh, interesting. Okay, because then then the woman that you're working with, yeah, she's kind of always she'll help. You get the option with her. It seems like most missions, and kind of like she gives you the alternate path essentially, which is cool.
Right. Yeah, the sort of buddy path. Yeah. You always, I mean, everybody. I think people generally are like, of course I'm going to do the buddy path. I want to rank up with my buddy. That gives me benefits, right? There's all these sort of pressures on the player to do things that are not like hard, fast rules, which is another thing I kind of like. It's like. It's the same thing where it's like, okay, I see what you're doing. But I don't mind that you're doing it. It's like, cool, I see. So it's
play along.
It works.
Willing suspension of disbelief. Interesting. So I'm wondering if maybe I don't want to go backwards, but I might want to test that theory out. Have I finished that mission already for them? I don't remember. Yeah, it's just awkward. Like, I don't know. I think I'm just too trained now by faction gameplay that I really. When I'm attacking the people I was working for earlier, it just feels bad. It's like I feel wrong about it. And so, yeah. Anyway.
Well, I mean, but also keep in mind that for a lot of these missions, you'll go in there and they'll give you the mission and say, oh, by the way, our guys are going to be there too, but they don't know you're working for us. So, you're just going to have to shoot them also.
Yeah, it's very, they've made the friction to murder very ironically, there's friction for staying alive, but there's not a lot of friction for murdering.
No, yeah. In fact, that's the way to achieve your goals. That's how you get your best life. Right there. Boy, a lot of murder. So that's a whole thing. I mean, I think that they are painting, when systems break down, how much it causes the sort of people who can grab power to really go too far, and never really fulfill their goals. Like it's a whole
there's a message
thing
in
with
there,
them, but
probably.
that's like, okay, you're working for us now. We're paying you under the table because you're experienced and good at what you do. But you might have to kill some of our guys. Like, can you imagine? Like, that's a very I mean, I guess that's the same thing like a No Russian was doing, right? It's the same thing.
Yeah. They're going to the hilt on this and sticking true to. I mean, you mentioned nihilism before too, and it's like there's just like and I've found more of the recordings too, and the Jackal, just like every one of those. I mean, I know that Heart of Darkness was an inspiration,
sure,
but even
and Apocalypse Now,
and obviously. Apocalypse Now, but even in that case, it's like I don't want to say that he was justified, but Marlon Brando's character, Kurtz, right? Kurtz. Of course, how did I?
Mr. Kurtz, he did.
Even Kurtz had this sort of like, this is hopefully not too much of a rabbit hole, but he had, obviously made bad decisions, but he had a compass that he was using, though he had gone insane, whatever, right? Like PTSD, the horror, all that brings Martin Sheen along with him in the movie, at least, and etc. But, and he wanted that to happen. So unless the Jackal, like right now, and maybe this does change. If it does change, kudos to them. But right now, the Jackal is very clear on who the Jackal is, right? It's like he is that kind of bad guy. And if it gets more nuanced, great. I don't anticipate it being that. But, it's like there's no doubt that he has to go down, I guess maybe is what they want. It's very, very, very black and white so far.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it gets more nuanced, but not super nuanced, right? And there is another binary choice at the end of the game that involves the Jackal.
Okay.
So, and you can sort of make your decision and the costs, which cost you pay, I'm going to love having you just because there's no way you're going to get to the end of this game. There's no way I'm going to get to the end of this game in the next week. So because I'm at like 42 or 45% and it still says Act 1. And I'm like, oh man, this game is like, how did I get any sleep over those 4 days? Like, I'm just wondering, how did I get this game done? Because I've played a lot. I'm not as nimble as I once was on the sticks. I guess I probably die more than I used to, but yeah, anyway, it's the whole thing is just there are these moments, and I'm going to send you, like, if I can find good videos of those sections, the sort of big story beat that I just reached at like 42 or so percent, and the end game stuff I think is pretty interesting and fun.
Okay. Well, I just want
and worth at least just watching and seeing, oh, so that's where they went. Yeah.
Because I mean, obviously from a formulaic perspective, I think I most, get a big portion of the game at this point. And so it's sort of rinse and repeat that and what different versions and scenarios, flavors are they going to do of that formula. But I guess it's such a charged situation, location, culture, factions, etc. The decision, like we talked about, sort of the diamonds a little bit in pre-show. I've unlocked the underground group by this point, and so there's this sense of like you can help some of the people who live here, etc. And it's so charged and such a great
by killing some of the other people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so
yeah.
I mean, but it's such a bold commitment to a backdrop that I guess I just want things to matter more. My choices to matter more, because they don't. Because I can play on both factions. I'm a hired gun. I can kind of do whatever. And of course, it's, I guess, an open world shooter, so that they wanted to give the player freedom. But in that sense of, I'm trying to think of another example where, they're just, I don't know, maybe, yeah, anyway, you know what I'm saying?
I need more. Another example where you're
well,
doing what?
An open world game where you are sort of like closing choices off by making certain other choices. You know what I mean? Where
Right.
you're taking content. Essentially, the production version of it is you're taking content away from yourself by making.
Right.
Well, I guess The Witcher. Yeah, The Witcher is an example, right? It's like there's things you can do, or I guess the ultimate example is Megaton, where it's like.
Right.
That is a meaningful open world decision that forever changes your game, and it's early in the game. So, that's I think the one that I would come back to. And I just forgot the example.
Yeah, it's a big one.
But I don't think there's anything like that here. So maybe there is coming up. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's more. I don't. There are not. I mean, I'll just be clear. There are not. I mean, you can work for one or the other factions. It does matter, and this is some stuff that is actually systemic. I do think you will get more APR missions at some point, and I think they're just the same missions, right? I think that's part of the systems that with the buddies, that Patrick Redding was working on. Where that's like, okay, how do we make it so we don't have to make everything twice? Right? That we can reuse it, just, spawn different enemies in there and do all of that stuff. All of that is actually pretty tough, I will say, to do. And so that's an interesting thing that they did. We tried dabbling in it in Skyrim and it was hard to support it well. It really, I think, required a lot more, direct investment in just that one thing. Right? And this is a narrower game in that respect. But I think that regardless of who you do the mission for, you will go to all these specific locations on the map, and I don't it's not like there's 6 locations you go to for the APR and 6 different locations you go to for the UFLM. Like, you're going to go to the farm, you're going to go to the airfield, you're going to go to the fishing village, you're going to have somebody drop whatever the, defoliating, whatever
from the plane,
etc.
But it may not be that buddy.
It may not be that buddy. It may not be that faction that you did the mission for.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I see. Okay. So now I know what you mean. So so they couldn't, I mean, they chose to repurpose that stuff versus, right. So the voice, probably the only thing that's really changing there is probably some of the scripting setup for what is spawning when you get there, and then VO, right. Probably.
It's really texture sets, honestly. It's like, do they have the red caps of the APR or the yellow caps of the UFLL, right? I mean, that's...
And then the script.
It comes down to that. Yeah.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah. That I think is is largely happening. It's sort of like playing, I think we referenced The Walking Dead, and how they, Sean and Jake said, Sean Vanham and Jake Rodkin said, please don't play it again. Play it once, have the experience, and don't ruin it for yourself. Like, how it's just going to come back. Let it be your experience, right? Was their feeling. And they're not the only, game designers who've kind of come out and said that. Like, this is a game that's meant to be played once. Like, if you play it too many times, it reveals what's going on underneath, and you may endanger your experience, right? I don't think that's really true for myself. Like, seeing how this thing works, of course, but we work in games, so I don't know how it is for people who don't. It doesn't really ruin the experience for me. I'm also not a spoiler person, so I guess I'm just kind of different in that way as well. I don't really care.
But you are a person that won't watch the Lord of the Rings movies because you don't want it to spoil the books.
That is correct, but that's very different. That's because I have my own vision.
It's a very different. I don't know if I agree, but it is different. I know what you mean.
Yeah. So it's okay, maybe my Gandalf, maybe not. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, who Ian McKellen is. So.
I've seen enough of the images from the films at this point where it's okay, well, I've definitely all that's polluted in, but
unfortunately, it's hard to. Yeah.
It's very hard to avoid. There's a lot of memes. So
it's all memes' fault.
It's all memes. Everything is memes.
Or as a friend says, memes. That's caught on. That's caught on in our house. We just
that's good.
Just call them memes now.
That's good. That's very amusing. I will keep that one in mind. I mean, so I think the same thing is true of the buddies system as well. And so last time you had said, hey, I think so. Basically, each buddy has a different thing that they do or whatever. I'm like, nope, entirely interchangeable, and that is systemic in the same way. That substitute this buddy in or that buddy, and I'm actually seeing it now in the second half. And I actually looked it up because I wanted to make sure I remembered some of the things that happen upcoming, since I might not get to it.
Mm-hmm.
But, after this sort of big event in sort of mid game, 42% or whatever, there is, you then go and you're like, okay, now here's your next missions, and what are they going to be about? And I went and looked up. It's like, oh yeah, if you've mostly been working for the APR, you're going to talk to this person. If you've mostly working for the UFL, you're going to work for this person. And there's probably an odd number of missions, so it's like you have to pick one over the other, basically, or maybe it's the last one you do is the one that makes this all happen the way it is. And it's like, based on what you chose, you're going to get this path or that path, but it's just a character switch. Like, you're going to talk to this character or that character, and they're different characters and skins or whatever, but they're interchangeable in the sense of progression, of the game and the story. And yeah, so there's different voice acting and lines and whatever, some differences there, because of course they have to swap out all the proper nouns. But fundamentally, it's like, you play the game once, you've played the game. Like,
yeah,
you're not going to have a different experience from different choices. Like, you could go play all one side, all the other side, like, and do 3 playthroughs. All 3 playthroughs are the same, in that respect. But that's not a bad thing if you play once, like, because you don't know that.
Right? Yeah, who's gonna? Yeah, the percentage of people playing this game more than once is or a game this size.
A game this long. Yeah, exactly.
So they're dabbling with the early days of dynamic storytelling stuff, but it's not like it's
well, and it's happening in the buddy system as well, because even though there are systemic benefits with the safe houses, as you get buddies to different I guess their reputation levels or something like that, they have some level that's associated with them on the pause screen. That's true. There is a journal that is kind of a HUD element where the game is paused. You can pause the game and go in and look.
Oh, I forgot about the journal. I need to go back. I was reading it for a while and I totally forgot about it. I forgot about that, but it's not an overlaid HUD, and it's the one place you can kind of pause the game. I think you can kind of do it anywhere, so there's a little. Well, even in the pause menu, the escape menu, whatever you want to call it, it's a notebook, right?
Yeah,
like the pages flip every time you go from. Exactly. So it's a menu, but it's presented as
it's presented diegetically because they needed somewhere to put that stuff. I think, like,
oh, for sure. No, I don't fault them for. But the VO of characters who reply, like when I'm getting missions, I did make a note that I forgot to mention pre-show, that when I'm getting missions, they refer to the character I chose specifically reference him based on his ethnicity. Yep. So they have, and in my case, it was fairly problematic. I'll just say, because I'm playing a non-white character.
Yeah, I am too. I'm playing Hakeem.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I can only imagine then. Yeah. But I'm playing, what's his name? Jan, I think is how you'd pronounce it.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so,
they are, they're sort of like, I think with some of that stuff, they are sort of the equivalent of the, was it Rocksteady that makes the Arkham games?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where, they basically get to have more swears in them the longer you go, and how they refer to characters repeatedly, especially Catwoman. as I recall.
Yeah.
The whole thing that they just like, it's because there's a limited VO budget for grunts. You hear the same things over and over again. Here it's like the equivalent of like, oh, we're on HBO, we get to say the F word, right? You know, it's like, you know, it's like they're leaning into like, oh, you're going to let us be fully mature. You know, let's be edgy in that way, to be, you know, grounded and gritty. And it's like, ooh,
not in that way.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Maybe you didn't have to go that far. So there's definitely things like that, that are happening. But yeah, I mean, there are, you know, there's not a ton of it, but there are, you know, basically what I'd say we would call ethnic slurs, right? I think is, you know, it's a choice. I'm not sure it was a necessary choice, but yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess, you know, yeah, I don't even want to go further into that because like the more I think about it, the more cynical I will be about it. So I just gotta leave it. I'm just gonna leave it right there. Well, say it's an unfortunate choice that I would not make.
Yeah, I mean, I won't. Yeah, I won't talk about it deeply either. But to make a vague statement, I mean, like they have set a goal for themselves to make a sort of like accurately simulated situation.
Yeah.
And so the people that they're putting, the characters they're creating in those situations are like, they might not be the best people. So we're going to write them that way. It's like, well, yeah, in history and in real life, that's true. But this, you're not actually doing that.
There's also no interiority to the characters who are being slurred in that way. Right. So there's also not, you don't see that, like, there's no way to feel that impact.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, it's like, that's why it doesn't work in a way that it works in other fiction, is that it's too thin.
Right.
It can't go deep enough.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a good point.
Know? So it's just, it's a limitation of our medium. Like that, some of that stuff is very, very hard. Like there are indie games which go into this stuff in great depth, but you're not doing the stuff you're doing in this game. It's a much smaller, like Papers, Please, where you're playing this border control agent. I think it was recently released on iOS, so for anybody who hasn't played it, it's definitely worth playing. But you're playing this border agent on like effectively like a former Soviet Republic type of place. It's not a real place, but it's dealing with dictatorship and the pressures of being in that system. Like somebody's in that job, right? And what is the pressure of being in that job and doing something that is very first of all invasive, but also on the other side kind of tedious. Like you're looking at paperwork, like that's literally what you're doing, you know, in the game. That's the gameplay, part of the gameplay. And they can go deep. He can go deep, I should say, because it's Lucas Pope, who is a one-man band. He probably had some contractors, but he generates the games, and he can go deep and be very, very narrow because he doesn't have to sell more than I don't know, whatever, 50 or 100,000. Like his number of units to break even is quite low. You know, and you know, I'm sure if it hadn't worked out, he would have gone and done something else, and you know, fine. It did work out, and happily, we also got the that great
Obra Dinn
puzzle game, Obra Dinn, yeah, Return of the Obra Dinn, which I also recommend. So I will, I'm a big Lucas Pope fan over here, but those are good games. Anyway, yeah, and it's the work you have to do to go deep enough to justify what you're doing on that surface level it's a lot of work, and it becomes very narrow what you can do in order to be allowed to, in my view, to be allowed to make those sorts of choices.
You can't be flippant about it because they're categorizing basically a character who has one sentence of a description.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's it. Yeah, it's like
exactly my point. You have no real sense of the lived experience. You know, the lived experience is the gameplay you have, right? That's it. That's the whole lived experience.
Yeah, which has no sense of identity or ethnicity or culture
or variation. So,
yeah,
as pointed out, right?
Yeah.
Anyway. All right, well, let's put a pin in it there. Next week we are going to do our takeaways. I will send Tim some footage to kind of let him know what happened. at different points in the game, so that he
now
sees that.
I have to stay on my path where basically I can't finish a game ever again on the podcast.
That's
just my journey.
That's what your Twitch stream is for, is to finish this game.
No, now, Dark Souls, please.
Dark Souls, you finish that one, and then you have to go to this one next. These are the rules.
Oh man, can you imagine?
Yeah. It's just like you just go from long game to longer game to longer game. Like you go from Far Cry 2 and then you got to finish Far Cry 6 on the stream. Because anyway, yeah. So we just have one email. It's a good thing to do here with just a few minutes left. The subject is Tim UTs, and it's from the Honorable TH is Isis Meyer all name. Hi again, Dev Game Club. Very excited about your Far Cry 2 playthrough since it's been on my list a long time, but I'm skipping it for now until I get to play it myself. So while listening to the Walking Dead bug agony stories in the listener emails on episode 319, I heard Tim mention his Mass Effect soapbox, but lament he'd probably never get to it. All right, Tim, you hooked me. And unfortunately, this means he's not going to hear this because he hasn't played Far Cry 2 yet. I'll have to reply to him in email. All right, Tim, you hooked me. I'm writing to give you your opportunity. Summon the soap. Get out the box. Climb on and have at it, sir. The Honorable T.H. Isis Meyer outname.
Oh, really? I got to be careful with this soapbox, to be honest. But
you do.
I guess I'll give a short version because we got a mail about it, and I should honor that. Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it before, but to remind, for full disclosure, I only played the first one, and I understand that the second one is quite good and fairly well liked by many.
I would say it's the best
one, yeah. And so my soapbox largely revolves around essentially the universe building side of it, because, as people probably know, and it's a little bit of how the sausage is made. It's like, KOTOR came out. Obviously, BioWare/EA didn't own Star Wars, so they wanted to, BioWare wanted to make their own sci-fi universe and world so they could create things like Mass Effect. And after I finished Mass Effect 1, it felt like that. It felt like they wanted to be, which is a good goal. Like I'm not faulting anybody for it.
Yeah, I mean, somebody who wants to go off and build their own creative universe.
Yeah, exactly. No, fair enough. But I think for me, it was about the way that it was portrayed and handled, and almost the messaging around it, because they're coming off of KOTOR, and we know, and there's this sense of this is a Star Wars, right? This is like, and there's definitely Star Trek is in there too. But for me, it just didn't land because it felt like, it felt very derivative and kind of like, kind of a soup of sci-fi that I just personally didn't resonate with. And so maybe soapbox is a strong way to put it, but it didn't. Yeah, it didn't hook me enough to play the second one, and I felt like I didn't connect on the same level, kind of ideologically, as I did with something like Star Wars or even Star Trek. I'm a bigger Star Wars fan than Star Trek, but they both have their ideologies, I think, pretty well understood for the most part. You know why you're coming to each of those, and Mass Effect has some of that, but it was such a, at least for one, which maybe two kind of starts narrowing this and like, sanding those sort of like rough edges. But after one, I was left a little vacant on motivation, and what is the ideology of this universe? What do they care about? And, there's the big bads and there's the different aliens and it's like factions and stuff, but it was sort of like, not for me, at least, not resonating, and it felt very it's similar to I don't want to be, again, I'm trying to be careful, and I think I'm failing a little bit like our Far Cry 2 conversation in that what is actually going to matter, You know what I mean? And yes,
Yeah.
I'm saving the universe, but at the end of the day, what's the ideology and that's why I like good sci-fi. It's like, what is that hook that drives me in through the universe to really care and do things. And this was hard to do in an epic RPG where you're going to choose what you're going to do, and you're going to be able to be good or bad. And there's a lot of options for you, but,
right.
So
yeah, so I get that. I mean, I think that's a big problem with a game built on a bunch of binary choices in some sense, right? It's you're constructing the story. I do think it has more structurally in common with Star Trek than it does Star Wars, which might be another reason why, as a more of a Star Trek person, I appreciate it. Because, Star Wars is like the story of, this one guy, right? And Star Trek is a story of a team of people working under, one person and coming together from their different disciplines, to achieve something, and so that's why I appreciate that more. I don't know why, something to do with a bald captain, maybe. So I sort of resonated more with it structurally. I appreciated that aspect of it. But I definitely see what you're saying. Like, I think it's hard because it's effectively schizophrenic, right? It's like, well, you could, you're Shepard, and you could be good Shepard on this mission and bad Shepard on that mission. And it's like, well, then who is she? For me, it was female Shepard, but like, so she's like, like you said, what does she represent? It's like, well, she represents whatever the player wants to do. And of course, because you have that player insertion, it's not like her choice is even narrow as a result of your previous choices. Like, you could do like the first half of the game all Paragon, and then at a certain point you'd be like, you know what, now I'm bad, and you just do the second half Renegade. Like, and that just feels really weird. Like, and that's a common problem, I think, with that sort of thing. Like, I think that The Witcher 3, though I haven't played much of it, does a lot better with its writing to make it and not having a system of like good karma, bad karma. That 2008's Fallout 3, had, right? To pick on a game I worked on a bit anyway. It's just weird to be like, to be able to just kind of flip that switch at any point and never have those options narrow. Like, and it's not saying anything about like, well, if that's always the choice you're going to make, here's why that choice is hard, right? Later on, like, you can't do this other thing that's not available to you because that's not you, right? I mean, and those costs kind of go away. I totally get it. Like, I think there is a more interesting thing there. Even in a binary choice game, I think there are more interesting things that you could do with that. But I think it's really hard, and the game's really big, right? So it's like, well, have to make a much smaller game probably, and we know how that goes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I think you make a good point about the binary choices and how your Shepard is going to be moving through the and Witcher is a good counterexample, because they famously, The Witcher 3 specifically, but they did this in the first two to some degree as well, is very much a gray. Like, they very, very much embrace the gray choices, right? And on purpose. Right. The other big difference, and why I resonate much more with The Witcher, even though the scope and scale is very similar, is it is a character being driven through this, right? It's not your character per se. And so that's a taste thing, of course, too. But you're going to limit yourself one way in either direction. You limit yourself on what you could do, and maybe it's just pick the one that you like the most. But to your point on the binary choices, though, and the Shepard, I'm actually not even talking as much about Shepard. I'm talking about the universe building themselves. Because to your point on Star Wars and Star Trek, it's like when you like play a scene from any Star Trek anything and play a scene from any Star Wars anything, you'll watch those, and if they're good enough versions of those, you know which one it is, right? Because there's certain there's a tone, there's an ideology, like I said, there's a certain focus, and they're very different, but they still have sci-fi aspirations, but in different ways. And I just, maybe I'm being too hard on it, but I don't know if you play a scene from Mass Effect, and you don't know what it is, say, if you would be able to be as clear about that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know. I mean, we had some feedback on Republic Commando when we had gotten to a certain point, and some of the feedback was, and we might have mentioned this sort of offsite day we had, I don't know, 6 months before it was done or 8 months before it was done. And one of the pieces of feedback was like, it doesn't feel Star Wars enough. And part of that was like, there's not enough stuff that's broken down and janky, like old tech that's like just kept being repaired. And like, that was what it was getting at. Like aesthetically, if you move through corridors, they didn't feel like the right kind of clutter, and as an example of like how we got it back to like the Star Wars vibe, as it were, even though we were doing something different with the franchise. And since you said we'd have to pick a good one of those, I guess I won't pick Skin of Evil or Spock's Brain from Star Trek, because you said it had to be good ones. But I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, it's a fascinating one, but I know Mass Effect's a popular. People love it, and I'm not trying to yuck your yum, as Jeff Canano would say, but that's my perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so thanks, TH, though you are not listening to this right now. Maybe you're listening to some point in the future, or I've steered you to this via email, and you can listen to the last 10 minutes of this episode. So there we have it. Thank you. That was sent to devgameclub@gmail.com, where you can send us your questions on anything Tim has said. Please leave me out of it. Of course, also leave us a review on the podcast infrastructure. I never say anything, that's at all contrary to the popular view. So I'm sure I'm the audience insert here. Anyway, we do also like to get your reviews and read those on the air. So if you have one, send it our way. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
And on twitch.tv/Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end, where, as I understand it, for the next 3 years, you'll be playing Dark Souls.
Yeah, at this rate. Uh-huh. Yep.
An hour at a time. I mean, if you played, all three of them like I did, you'd have about 500 hours of play, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to happen at an hour, at what, 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week, something like that.
Yeah, it's just usually 2. Yeah. So I'll wind down. I don't know what I'll do. Maybe I'll play some offline and then maybe do the final boss. Stream that someday. But
yeah, that would be good. Anyway, you'll be able to find him there. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo and merch store are by Mark Garcia. Have fun racing place to place across the sands this week. And good night.
Good night.